Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Hamilton. I am the director of Suitcase Stories at the International Institute of New England. Thank you for signing on. I understand we have people locally, internationally. We are locally here in Boston, but the International Institute operates in Greater Boston, in Lowell, Massachusetts, and Southern New Hampshire. We are a 100-year-old organization that does refugee resettlement, English instruction, employment services, and legal services, which right now are more critical than ever. I will want to make a quick commercial that if you are someone who needs legal immigration services, whether applying for citizenship or green cards, you might be aware that the fees for those services are going to jump dramatically on October 1st. If you reach out to us right now at ime.org/legal, we can make sure to get you enrolled and try to avoid those fees. But today we're talking about my favorite program. I'm a little bit biased, which is Suitcase Stories. Suitcase Stories is a program we launched a few years ago that raises the profile of refugee and immigrant voices in our community and uses arts as a way to have a dialogue and connect people across cultures and nationalities and neighbors. And I am joined here by one of my favorite Suitcase storytellers, U-Meleni Mhlaba-Adebo. Hi, U-Meleni.
Hi, it's so great to see you again and to be here. Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Yes, I love that we have this international audience.
Yeah, I love it.
I have never been to Zimbabwe, but yesterday I was coaching somebody who is in Zimbabwe right now.
Oh, okay.
She's going to be participating in our upcoming Suitcase show next Friday at online at Tufts University. But
Awesome.
I want to hear more about your life. For people who don't know you as well as I do, can you just give us some background? Where'd you grow up? What do you do? What are your interests?
Okay, sure. So I'm from Zimbabwe, but I was born in Massachusetts, in Leominster in particular. My parents were going to graduate school at the time, but I left when I was about 4, and I spent my formative years in Zimbabwe, in Harare specifically, the capital, and really enjoyed going to school. I went to a private school, so wore uniforms, was very sort of formally whipped into shape. If you want a visual, think, what is that, Harry Potter, but without the magic. That was sort of my school experience. And then you includes Catholic nuns and you get the gist of it. So that was my experience growing up, always very creative. I came to the US to go to college and I've been here since. So I really feel like I am my home are in both continents, if you will. And sort of I vacillate between those two continents in terms of both my lived experience and also my creative experience. And so I'm both Zimbabwean and American. And on different days, I feel more aligned with different parts of myself.
No, well, we all do in some ways, right? So you are, I mean, a Renaissance woman. You are a poet. You are a singer. You are a writer. You are a storyteller. You are an educator. Tell me how you blend all of these together. Like, do you feel like a different person in each craft, or is it just all of it?
I think I'm fairly consistent in all the different roles I play. I think I knew very young I was an artist. However, I think school in particular tried to, in some ways, try to either beat it out of me or nurture it, but not so much as a career choice. I really had a great time in high school in Zimbabwe. My teachers were phenomenal and they supported the creativity, but not necessarily as a path, a profession. Which is largely the reason why I came back to the US, because I wanted to be able to determine my own destiny. And I wanted to be an artist and think about how creativity could be infused in the path that I chose. So in terms of my work experience, I'm an educator, but I also have a public health background in the sense that I spent about almost a decade in the Boston Public Schools teaching health and wellness through the arts, sort of weaving that in. And at the same time, I started performing spoken word, which then moved into music, which then moved into theater and dance, etc. And so that has sort of evolved but I think the fundamental thing, I'm an artist first, and that's the lens with which I do the work, whether it's teaching kids or adults or doing trauma-informed work, being a parent. It's sort of, it is one and the same, if you will.
And when did you sort of transition and become involved in education? If arts was sort of your first focus, was it an extension of, because you found arts as a way to connect with people? or was it a parallel path for you?
I think it was parallel. I mean, formally, my degrees are in social psychology and my master's is in education. And through that, I did a lot of multicultural ed and theater. So I learned it sort of somewhat formally. And then outside of the classroom, I did a lot of performances and things of that nature, really working on my skill and what it meant to be a creative artist. And then I just intentionally blended the two because I found that it made sense, whether in the classroom or whether I was doing, performing. I felt that that was a better way of engaging, because as you know, as an artist, you really tap into the human spirit, and feelings are universal. They have no color. And I think when I learned and understood that, it sort of permeated in everything that I do.
I'm not, I come from a different path, but share your interest in using arts in education. I actually came from working in refugee affairs for 20 years. And for the first 15, I did trainings. I was a big trainer, right? I had the curriculum, but I did the speeches and the keynotes. And I felt like I was connecting with people, but not in a meaningful way. And it wasn't until I started developing and doing storytelling that I thought, this seems to be, the audience is receiving it differently, right? They listen to you differently.
Yes.
And then the best is to try to blend those two. And I know that that's what you're doing
Yes.
now. It's like, how can I sneak art in?
Yes.
Tell me what you talked about trauma-informed work. What does that mean for people that aren't familiar with that field?
Yeah, so I would say for the last couple of years, I have transitioned to being a trainer, interestingly enough. And so I've been training trauma-informed, meaning we are talking about how does the trauma that affects people affect how they do their everyday work, how they show up at work, and how they learn. And because I come from direct teaching experience, and teaching college, teaching high school, and also teaching teachers, I use that lens and understanding trauma to really talk about how do we take care of ourselves as educators, as folks who are working in either social work or clinicians or educators. And then more importantly, how does our culture, how does that impact how we view the world, how we heal, how we also deal with the challenges. And particularly now with COVID, I think, it's really important to really lean on sort of the cultural frameworks that we already have inherently that help us move. And I think arts is a really great way to tap into that aspect that can really be helpful and save people's lives in some capacity.
So I haven't had the privilege of being in one of your workshops. I've been on stage with you and watched you shine. What does that actually look like in the room? Like if I'm going to a workshop and you're going to do sort of trauma-informed artistic expression, what does that look like?
Well, when I've gone and done some work with educators in particular, we talk about first sort of the biology and the understanding of the fight or flight, what happens when we have triggers and we have trauma and sort of our body systems and our reactions. And then we really unpack, well, what are the ways in which we have dealt with trauma in our lives? What kinds of things have affected us? And what did we do to get to the other side? And we kind of look at the different ways in which people approach something like, for example, something simple like, laundry, for example. People view laundry, or grocery shopping or just everyday mundane things differently. It's all about a perspective shift. So how can we look at some of the things that we deal with through a different lens that allow us to go on to the other side, so that we can deal with those things? The other thing that's really critical, I think, is allowing people, giving space for them to really reconnect with themselves. Because oftentimes when you are in sort of healing professions, which I think educators, clinicians, and so forth are, they are so always giving to other folks that they forget to fill their own cups, if you will. And sometimes it's really just a question of an invitation of getting people to be still in their own soul, if you will. So that is either through meditation, through visual stimulation, i.e. looking at different images, what resonates, and having them really think about a time where they felt a particular way, who were the people in their lives who impacted them, who saw them. This whole concept of sawubona. Sawubona means to see in Ndebele. you know, who really sees you, and how did you feel when someone saw you, and think about that, because that feeling can really inform how you then show up for someone else. So that's just an example of some of the like activities that we do in the workshops. You know, I also include, and certainly in the work that I've been doing through Malco Project, which is my own consulting firm, I've really evolved some of those things into principles, DAO principles that are specific to my culture in Zimbabwe. And that really informs the way in which I look at the world.
Can you give us an example for those of us
Yes,
familiar with
yes.
Zimbabwe culture?
Yeah, so one of the principles that in the Malco Project is buya. Buya is a word, it means to speak. And I think the important thing about speaking is being able to speak your truth. Speak to your own personal experience and be honest with what it is that you're speaking about. Own your experience and say it out loud, and share yourself, be authentic. So that's one principle. There's another one, a principle of simudza. Simudza means to uplift. And uplifting other people is really important, but it comes from understanding the root of who you are and your inherent skills. And so how do we get to uplift others? And we get to that by understanding who we are, and there are different exercises and experiences that we do to get there.
So you talked about speaking your truth, which is what the type of storytelling Suitcase Stories is about. It's about you sharing your own lived experiences. I know that the first time you were on stage and felt like you shined, you were singing other people's songs and maybe reciting other people's words. But over time, you write your own music, you write your own poetry, you write your own stories. What was that shift like for you to go from sharing other people's works to sharing your own?
I think it was, I felt very vulnerable. I mean, for a long time, I've written poetry, but I didn't share it with the world. It was just my own way of processing stuff. And until my friends sort of forced me to share it publicly, I realized that my experience, other people can resonate. So I think there's a measure of vulnerability. I think that because there's so many things that I want to say, I think right now I'm sort of sifting through what are the prominent themes that are coming out. But there's also an incredible sense of freedom when you're speaking from your own space. And I'm not saying that you can't be inspired by other people, but when you are sort of faced with your own words and your own feelings, and you put them out into the world and they're sort of reflected back, there's definitely no greater feeling than that. And so opportunities that you offered me, like telling my immigration story, which I hadn't even thought about.
Really?
Interestingly, it really shifted things for me. I know you're like, well, of course you would have thought about the fact that you were, yeah, but it just never, it never really occurred to me, to think of it as a story, even though that's my lived experience. But also, I also didn't really think too much until I had to, about how much, how strongly my mother's gardening and her features so heavily in the way in which I move in the world. And it took that story for me to recognize that. And so it is definitely so interesting, the things that occur when one is asked, but also when one is given space to like pause and look at their craft a little bit different.
Well, we at Suitcase Stories, we have a program called Suitcase Stories Unpacked, where we go into schools everywhere from middle schools to college and teach storytelling through the lens of migration. And I did share your story this week with a number of students at Bunker Hill. And U-Meleni, I'm just going to have to give you a lot of credit for a second. This one young man was like, wow, like he was like just in shock from your story.
Oh.
He just kept saying like, is she a poet? I was like, yeah, she's a poet. She's like, the poetry, but the story, and she blended it, and she's just amazing, and went on and on and on. But then I said, well, that's, wonderful. I said, is there anything you could connect with it though? And he said, oh yes, my family's from the Dominican Republic, and seeds and plants and flowers are so important. My grandmother had a flower shop. And he just says, I feel like I know you, and like, or know, you, U-Meleni. And I just thought, like, seemingly a young, Dominican guy and U.S. Zimbabwean woman, there isn't necessarily immediately a connection, but he is like, he's your new biggest fan.
That's incredible.
what advice would you give to him? Because he's just starting to craft his stories.
Mm-hmm.
What did you
Mm-hmm.
learn as you started to craft yours that I could bestow to him as wisdom?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say is think about something that's consistent, that you think about all the time,
Mm.
because whatever you think about all the time is generally something that really is important to you, which means you need to do something about it. So, you know, I mean, if it's something tactile, a lot of times, you know, if I feel stuck, I'll look at photographs and that will sort of, you know, stir up.
Mm.
Interestingly, I have, I don't know if you, can you see
Is
this
that your
picture?
mom?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
my mom and me in my pink snowsuit. This
I
was,
love it.
I talked about this in the Suitcase Stories.
I love
So,
it.
you know, what are the things that sort of inspire you, some tactical things that you have in your home that you can use to kind of stir up your memory that you want to share. And sort of also think about what are the lessons that you have learned that are handed down. And those are the things that have some of the gems that you may want to share in the story. And then the other thing I would say is share what you are comfortable with sharing. You know, and share for yourself, not for you. I mean, share for yourself, meaning that the story that you want to share must be what you want to put out into the world, and that you can answer to when people ask you questions. You can stand firm in it,
I think
and that's really important.
I'm
And
really
just
glad you
trust
said that.
yourself.
I'm really glad because particularly the stories that we feature, there's many of them have lots of trauma. People who
Mm-hmm.
have survived refugee situations or lost loved ones. In fact, in the same class that I was featuring your story, we watched Jean Apollon, who's from Haiti, and he's telling a
Mm-hmm.
very powerful story about how dance is one of the ways he has gone on to heal. And now he runs his own dance studio here in Greater Boston, but he lost
Mm-hmm.
his father in a very traumatic event. And the students were like, how could he tell that? And in
Mm.
terms of like literally, how could he speak those words and not be traumatized
Yeah.
by it? And I said, well, you'll notice that he did a couple, what I would say, very smart decisions for himself. One is you don't have to say a lot to get a lot across, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
he just gave us two sentences that very clearly articulated the level of trauma that his father and his family experienced without having to go on and on and on. And I said, did
Yes.
you need more as a listener? And they're like, no. And I said, right. He also needed to give himself permission to not go so far down that it was too hard
Mm-hmm.
to share. And at the same time, he
Yes.
also used humor. I
Mm-hmm.
think, and I feel like I need to call and ask him now, but I'm pretty sure that he deliberately chose the next lines because they were a little funny and he was able to give himself a breath. And I think it's the same for all of us. But also, I tell people, you only tell stories you want, like you said, right? And we have this young man in this
Yes.
class that said, I don't want to tell my immigration story. I said, great, you don't have to tell it. I said, are there other stories
Mm-hmm.
in your life, whether cross-cultural
Mm-hmm.
moments you'll never forget, or lessons you learned from somebody, or even traveling? Because when we travel, and I know you do a lot, our lives are
Yes.
transformed by what we see in the world, right?
Yes, yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, it's funny, you know, you talk about sort of the choice and the decisions that you make, you know, because I think when I was telling the story, I definitely was rather deliberate in the repetition of the beginning and the end in terms of sowing and the seeds, and
yep.
you know, and sort of that almost as a melody, if you will, a poetic melody. Um, but I also realized that within writing the story, I also wanted to do almost like a tribute, if you will, to my mother. Without knowing it, I was doing a tribute. And I think, I mean, you know, in retrospect, considering she recently passed, I think that the fact that it is sort of a living testimony, if you will, to how her planting and me being her seed and all of that is really important, sort of in a cyclical, soulful way.
Right.
The other thing too, I realize is that oftentimes, you know, when people hear the word immigrant or immigration story, and if you are African, the supposition is that your story must be one of incredible trauma, which may include, you know, death, destruction, poverty, and you came to America or wherever else you went to for salvation. And I think for me, I don't think I thought about it intentionally, but when I think about it now, some conversations I've had with folks who've heard my story is that it gives them pause, because they're a little stunned when I talk about, oh yeah, I grew up in a little village in America, and they're like, wait, what? And for them, it really just begins a discourse of what is an American,
Right.
and begs that conversation. And so, it goes back to sort of the choice, and also changing narratives. I always like to reference Chimamanda Adichie in the Danger of a Single Story.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so, yeah, and so what I love about Suitcase Stories is the diversity of experience and stories and perspectives that are shared on the platform. So
No, I really am grateful to people. I mean, I usually start out by saying, what's the stories we haven't heard, right?
mm-hmm.
And because particularly when it comes to chronology stories, a lot of people feel like if I'm going to tell my immigration story, I have to be like, oh, here, 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 here. And I'm like, pick a moment from there. I mean, just pick
Mm-hmm.
one moment from our journeys, because that's really a place to dig into. And so I'm just so grateful to everybody who shared, and particularly yourself. I want to pause and say, if there's anybody that's watching that wants to ask U-Meleni a question about her education work, about her artistic endeavors, about her suitcase story, please, you can pose those to me in the Q&A and I'll make sure to pass them on. But I'm curious, what are you working on now, artistically or otherwise?
What am I working on? So Maoko project, I mentioned and it's named for my mom. Hama Maoko is like a phrase that she would always say, which is essentially self-determination, that we are created with everything that we need to be self-sufficient. I've always believed in using my art to do something. So I'm really passionate about working with organizations and people that are either doing work around social justice, around public health, around education, around sort of self-care as it relates to educators, uplifting, as I mentioned earlier, Simuzad, that stuff is really important. So I'm developing it, some workshops that I'm going to be presenting in the near future. So that's what I'm doing on that
Great.
front. And then I'm also working on a fundraiser that I want to do. I actually want to run I think about 60 miles from here to Leominster in service of raising money for mental health, mental well-being in the African community here in Massachusetts, as well as in Zimbabwe. That is my vision and my goal. So I'm working on those two projects, plus parenting my 9-year-old between
I was going to say
Zoom lessons, making sure that he's okay too. So that's my primary project, and just making sure that we can stay sane in this crazy time that we're in.
Well, yeah, you and I also share a commitment to raising awareness around mental health. I'm actually doing a show Sunday night. There's a gentleman, Sean Willingham, who does a show called 7 by 7, and it's all stories around mental health related. Another subject that is often stereotyped, right? And we need to break down and expand the narrative. I will do that. I will not be running with you for 60 miles. I admire your
what if you bike?
I would bike it. I would absolutely.
I know you bike, so yeah. So what I might do is I might open it up. I'll say run, bike, or walk with me 60 miles, and we raise some money. I think that would be pretty awesome.
One of the most profound experiences I had in a walk was there's a thing called coming out of the darkness, and it's a fundraiser for suicide prevention. And I had an experience. I do a story on the Moth about stumbling upon a man who was going to commit suicide. And I walked in his honor in DC, and you would leave at midnight. You'd leave at 5 o'clock as the sun went down. You'd walk 26 miles. So when the sun came up, and with the light, there was light on these issues.
Wow. Yes.
And it was it's a story I should probably someday tell, because to walk among people, there was thousands of people who have been touched by suicide in one way or another, was profound for sure. But we have some questions for you.
Okay, awesome, sure.
Kurt would like to know, when your friend nudged you to share your poetry publicly, what did you do? What was the first?
Okay, the first thing, so I remember it. The first thing I said was, hell no, I'm not gonna go up there and share my work. I was like, what are you doing? And it was kind of embarrassing, because they were like, Melanie, can you come to the mic? And I was like, oh no. So I went begrudgingly. I shared my stuff. I was probably like looking like this and scared. And at the end of the poem, people clapped and came up to me and they said, oh my God, you just shared my story. And, and I was like, oh my God, this is not just about me.
Yeah.
So I will always be grateful to one of my best friends, Annabella. She's in New York right now, and you know, because she is literally the reason why I even share anything at all. Her and her sister Anna Fidelia. So I really appreciate them pushing me out there. But it was definitely terrifying. And it still is, to honestly, when I share, because it matters very much to me.
Mm-hmm.
That everything that I do creatively does something for someone, and so, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity to do so. Thank you for the question.
Yes, no, I think I tell everybody I get nervous on every story. And in fact, I
Mm-hmm.
often am heard say, but I say backstage to everybody, my mom told me when I was getting into performing that Oprah says, if you don't get nervous, you don't care. So I say we all
Mm-hmm.
care a lot then.
Yes, exactly.
Lynette would like to know, where does your inspiration come from?
Oh, my cousin. Yeah, so it comes from just everyday life. I mean, I've always been someone who is an empath, exceedingly so, which means I feel things so deeply.
Mhm.
And in order for me to be able to function, I suppose, I use that as an inspiration for the work that I do. And that's with anything, not just performance, just in life in general. I feel things very deeply. And so all the things that resonate with me, I use it in some capacity in my work. I think it really helps me to be a great educator in terms of being able to connect on a sort of like an energy level with my students and folks who are in my training sessions. So I do think that it's being an empath is a gift, and being able to draw from life and the things that I want to change, and the things that I want to see different, and the things that I celebrate about life that inspire me.
Right. So I would remiss not to bring up that right now, with issues around racial inequality and police brutality and such in the country,
Mm-hmm.
have you seen anything that you think has been done particularly well artistically to address this, or any sort of advocacy? I
Mm-hmm.
know we're looking for those in times
Mm-hmm.
like these.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been really happy about is I mean, I'm also, in addition to being an artist, I'm an athlete too. I'm a runner, and so I'm involved in the running community in different ways. And one of the things that I have loved to see, especially as someone who started trying to diversify running many years, I would say maybe like 8 years ago. And now, of course, there's different running groups, Unnamed Run Crew, which is awesome, that I run with sometimes. They've been doing a lot of great work, not only running, but cycling, to raise awareness, for example, for Breonna Taylor, getting folks together to ride and to speak out for justice for her. And so really being able to be involved in that way, both as a runner, as well as a cycler, but as well as a poet. You know, they do a lot of events before that. So I think the running community, at least that I've seen in Boston, and also running for justice, there have been multiple runs that have happened in Franklin Park, and they are still happening in different parts of the city where runners are coming together, and people are committing you know, to fundraise for organizations that are around social justice and equality. And that's been really great to watch. As in addition to, you know, a lot of folks who are creating pieces that are resonating pieces, whether it's a visual art or performances, books that are written, sharing their stories. All of these things, I think, are really instrumental and really great that people are doing.
So I have your book, but also, who do you like to read?
Actually, one of the books that I've been reading, of course, I don't have it in front of me right now. It would be great if
I
I
was just going
did.
to say, I don't
It
have.
would be great if I had a plug. I mean, outside of my own book, which is cool, Soul Psalms. But the book that I'm really excited about, it's called The Good Immigrant. And it's somewhere, because whenever I'm reading books, I put them all over different places. But The Good Immigrant, what I love about it is a collection of stories about the immigrant experience, you know, kind of fitting with the Suitcase Stories. And what I love about it is it has different vignettes of stories where immigrants are talking about, you know, different aspects of their story. And so it has diverse voices, from talking about what it's like when you are a, you know, New York Times bestseller and you're going around the country and talking about your book, and people are questioning how you can write about various things because you're an
Oh,
immigrant, like who are you? You know, all that issue of
wow.
sort of
Yeah.
power to write. So very interesting stuff that, you know, that I've been reading in that particular book. And then I've been rereading a lot of books, different poems. Russ Gay is a poet that I like. He has a collection called The Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude.
Wow.
So really, yeah, really beautiful poems. And I don't know if you guys do this, but I underline and highlight stuff that I read. I don't know what it is, but I like the tactile experience of books. So I do a lot of that. And so those are the things that, you know, when I have the time, that's what I do. But
I
I
was going to
honestly,
say, U-Meleni, you are the busiest woman I know.
yeah, but when I have the time, that's what I do. Yeah.
Oh, please tell me you listen to books while you run, so I feel like you've got two things done. I don't know
See,
how you do it
I
all.
can't do that. I can't do the listening to, like, you know, stories while you run and podcasts. I just can't do it.
You just run.
Yeah, I just run. You know, I want to see. I mean, I'm sort of those runners that run and have, you know, conversations with people. Oh, how are you doing today? It's great to see you. That's me.
I need your kind of runner. I'm not good. Oh, Melanie, I could talk to you
Yeah.
for hours. And I'm so grateful that you were an early storyteller with the project and you continue to participate. I think of the young woman from Congo, Rahima, who saw your story, and she's a runner. And she just was like in awe. She's like, I have to meet her. And so you touch people all the time in many different ways in all of the areas of your work. So we're so grateful.
Yeah,
and I know that you'll continue to tell stories. And where can people find you if they want to find your website?
So you can just go to U-Meleni.com and you can find me there. And from there, you can, you know, find me on Instagram, Facebook. You just Google U-Meleni and stuff will come up. So I would really love to stay connected. And if you think there's any place that I should be and I don't know about it, let me know.
Right.
But thank you so much for tuning in, Cheryl. Thank you so much for this gift of sharing an aspect of myself that I never thought I could. And it's been awesome to be your friend too.
I just appreciate that you walked up to me at the Boston Public Library and said hello. So everybody wins.